Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about developing chords. I'm going to show you an example, but first I want to prep you on this idea. So we're going to develop our chords. We have a melody we've just talked about. Now we're going to move into, we've developed our melody, but it's not enough necessarily. We need some support. And in this particular case, we're going to use chords for our support rather than drums and rhythm. So they often link together, and there are two ways you can really develop it. You can develop it using sonic character changes. So you could say, here's a chord progression to support my melody. It's not distracting from the melody, it simply supports the melody. And instead of changing the chords to embellish the melody, you're going to change the sounds to embellish the melody. So you'll say, here are the flutes playing this background chord movement, and they could be, they could be playing eighth notes, pulsing the chord or whatever it is. And then you have French horns outlining parts of the chord. They're highlighting maybe the upper notes in the chord. And then it gets passed off to the saxophones that put their own unique spin on it. And now you have trumpets outlining it, and the French horns have now switched roles to the lower notes of the chord, the root notes or whatever. And so you have this really excellent orchestration going on where it's getting passed around. So that's using sonic character to develop your chords. It's a very, very common method used in most electronic songs today, and it's used in beats to keep them interesting when they're very repetitive. Another thing, so the other way is harmonically. So you're going to change the notes. You're going to say, hey, look at this. Here are some notes. Here they are in a different order. Here are new notes that are also compelling and a spin-off of what you just heard. And so you develop it harmonically. So in this piece, I've got color development here, and then I've got harmonic development here. So this one's based on notes. This one's based on color. I'm going to play it for you and just listen for those things. And so this is color, and here we go. Yes, that's cool to me. So this is a track under construction, by the way. It's not done, but you can see more or less the stuff is here. So we see here that this is very clear sound development. Very clear. We're moving things. You can hear the French horn, the brass sweeps come in here, make it very large. There are no new notes being presented in any new fashion. It is all the way the sound is presented and what notes I am highlighting with that sound. So I'm shifting around the way you experience the same notes. And it's very compelling if you do it right. If you don't do it right, sometimes it can just sound monotonous because it's repetitive. And usually this is just from poor choice of how you meld your sounds. So pay attention to things like volume, automation, like the chords sweep in and out on the brass. They're not stagnant. If I come in here and we see here I have dynamics, there's my dynamics. You see they're going in and out and in and out. And I had to sculpt them a little bit. You may have noticed something if, well, some of you may have. Some of you may not have cared too much. But this originally was started out as a big room track. And this was my melody. But I wrote in my chords and I wanted my melody to be kind of implied, not necessarily right out there in the forefront. So I hit it amongst my chords, but you can hear it back there. It's like dun 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 dun. And so my idea was I'll bring it out at the drop and it'll sound epic. But this is like, this needs work. So I'm not even going to show that to you. It's not worth showing you. So that's sort of the idea here. And so as I sweep it together, these chords are supporting a melody that's implied. It's not necessarily all the way there. So it takes you on this sort of, it creates an interesting way of experiencing the piece, at least in my opinion. So as we move in here, I introduce some new strings. I introduce some more instruments, but you see the idea is not very hard. Down here is a very cool one, and I need to create, one of the things that makes this work is I use timbral development to usher in more timbral development. So I have the flutes and they get louder and louder. Well, this isn't necessarily the flutes, but the strings or whatever it is, they get louder, and then boom, I have like a big hit. And in this case, I picture like, this is what was happening in my head. I was like, I picture a gigantic like ball full of smoke falling from the sky in this cement room, hitting the floor, and then and all the smoke comes out and it climbs up the walls, and this whole room is just filling up with smoke. That's like what was going on in my head. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but check it out. So I added in this synth and to add into the development to create this illusion that I had in my head more real. So here it is. Like, I think that was pretty much what I wanted to do. So I don't know. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you don't see that, but I totally see like this, one of those. So anyways, that was a cool movement to me, and it was a cool way of blending this sort of orchestral feel with an electronic feel. And as we get in here, I sort of enter this unorthodox riser with this enormous choir move. So really quick, I just want to recap the method for doing something like this. If you watched the previous video on soul chords or chill chords, we created a chord structure and then divvied up the way we had created these chords to different parts, sounds in our track, so that it was more interesting. And that was a sonic development example. So that's a great example in that video if you want to go check it out. But you just create a chord progression, and then you decisively enter in new color sounds. So you don't have to stress so much about the theory. You can just come up with a cool progression and away you go. Now over here, we keep our sound consistent, yet we keep our sound consistent, but we change the notes to make it more interesting. If you play piano, that's what the piano does. The sound is the piano. What makes it interesting is the harmonic development, the story that goes along. Now, there are cases where you can sort of achieve a similar effect with just about any instrument as here. But typically, if you're going to be playing the piano, it's the chords are going to change in a supporting role to match the harmony of the melody. These will typically too. But in a different way. Like you see, it's very sonically focused. So they'll change just enough to make sense with the melody. And then, of course, there's everything in between where there's like equal amounts of both going on. But let me go ahead and play this part for you. So, okay, I've already played it for you once. I'm not going to play the whole thing. And so you see here we have our voice singing on top. They're singing like that. And then only a lot better. And then we have all these big choir coming on. And now there's a couple of sort of unspoken rules about doing this in a acceptable sense. Of course, there's all, take it for what it's worth. That is, your support and development of chords when it comes to harmonic development should never get in the way of your melody. That it would completely destroy the purpose of them being there. They should just be there to support the melody, and thus the chords are your main idea, which they could be. Your chords could be your melody and your chords at the same time, which usually comes into a combination of the sonic combined with the melodic. So what I mean is, on a piano, if I were to play a melody like I wouldn't want my left hand to do anything that would be distracting from it unless I was being a polyphonic writer. So what that means is maybe on the left hand I'd go do ta 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 do ta 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 do ta 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 do ta ta ta, and so my notes would be changing, my chords would be changing on my left hand according to the harmonies that are going on in my right hand. So this leads way to a workflow. So typically when I'm going to write something like this, I'll write my melody first in this particular case, and then I'll write my chords next. So I can select, and the way this would work if you've never done this before, and I get questions like this all the time in harmony tutoring, because people have to write these harmonies and they're new to it. So I say, sing a melody, because your voice is very intuitive. So you saw me just come up with something. If you don't, you probably just feel embarrassed to do it, which is almost always the case. And so just think of a cool melody and then write down that melody. So let's just say, it was like, let's just say, for example, and then we say, okay, it's not a great melody, but let's just, there we go. So we have a basic shape. It's whatever. But what we'll do is we'll say, okay, where are the most important beats in my rhythm? And this is where you will now use your theory and rhythm knowledge and apply it so that you can make something cool, right? So we say, okay, here is important. This is, first off, it's a tonic note. So that's an important note. And it's on the most important beat in this particular meter. It's on beat 1. And so this is the most important. The second most important note would probably be this F. And then the G, again, we hit a major beat, and then a D. So if I wanted to write 4 chords, so you could write in chord progressions that work in different ways. So you could have your chord, you could have a chord be here's a chord, and then, so on and so forth. Or you could have a chord. Typically, depending on the role of what's going on melodically, that'll determine how long your chords are. And so you see I chose here to go with bar, 2-bar chords. You don't have to do that. So here I might go, okay, I want to C. And because it's so fast, if I were to like do like that wouldn't sound that great, which is what some people might write down. But what I'll do is I'll just do a C major, and I'll make it softer, right? I don't want it as loud as my notes up here. And then, because it's the melody, let's see here. So I've got an F. So I'm like, you know what? I'll take this and I'll just make this an F chord. And you could experiment with different inversions. And then as my melody develops, I'll just change this process around. Now, if you do know theory and harmony and stuff, then you actually know that there's a chord structure, like the 5 pulls really strongly to the 1. If you go from a 6, you can get to a 2 chord really easy. That kind of stuff really helps with just knowing where things generally pull to. And then you could pull in more advanced moves like secondary dominance and stuff of that nature. But right now we're focusing on just like basics, and we're not going to get into this whole theory tangent. But those are the thoughts that sort of go on in the head while I'm working on something like this. That's how, like, when I'm making something like this, I'm like, oh, what if I add a 2 here? That'll give me some notes that are more relatable to the 5th, so I can move over to the 5th. And like, that's what's going on in my head if I'm getting technical. If I'm just feeling it out, which is what a lot of people do when they don't know how I used to do it, it can be a lot more challenging, but oftentimes it's a little more rewarding too. But anyways, here's what we have. Oh, this is a monophonic instrument. And there we have it. So now these are like way too soft. So you see that like fits perfectly well. Now, of course, it sounds corny and stupid because they're really basic, and it follows, the sound design is it's just a piano. So you could vary it up with sonic texture, spice it up a bit too. But harmonically speaking, maybe we'll do like something like this, right? And like this. And then you'll make a cooler melody, of course. And so now we've got the supporting role going on. It's not distracting, and it even enhances the rhythm and gives us a better sense of what we originally intended with our melody. And so that is the process I would go through for something like that. Then you get crazy and add in all these different flavors and notes and stuff. There's always going to be a mix of these two elements sort of going on. Even the way you instruct the piano player to play the piano will change the sound, and thus it has an element of this going on as well. Now, I do want to point out some really cool examples that you could go check out. I don't know the official name of the piece, but that waltz in Cinderella, I sang it well enough that if you know the song, that should have been enough for you to recognize it, hopefully. So that waltz is cool because elements of a supporting chord momentarily will totally jump ship and become part of the melody for like one note, and then they'll go back. They create this syncopation. It'll be like dum bum 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 bum. Where over here they're playing. I do this because the melody's over here. Okay, just pretend that these are the instruments. The main melody's over here, but these instruments will chime in and they play a supporting role. But that one note for a moment becomes part of the melody. And when you get a melody that works off this kind of syncopation going on here, that is like super cool. Like it just drives so good. And you might be going, how do you make up a melody like this? Well, it takes a lot of skill. You got to think of a really good melody. Like it's got to be something that, like that kind of a melody where it's just compelling as an idea all its own. And there are actually pieces entirely based off of composers who think they've got a melody so compelling that they can repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and it will never lose its quality. And they can do things like this when you have a melody that strong. So you can take elements from your lower notes and incorporate them into from your supporting chords and your development chords and move them into your melody for a moment. And so on the piano, if you were to play this, you'd actually see the notes that go dun, dun, that one. You'd see that one happen over in the left hand sometimes as part of the roll. And so it's really a pretty cool experience to play pieces like that because it's just like, it's so integrated. It's got a magic about it. So anyways, to recap, because I don't want to drag it too long, but one is you simply use colors, and the other one is you simply change the notes. That's like if you were to boil it down to just a couple sentences, that's what you're doing. And so however much theory you want to get involved is completely up to you. You saw there are advantages to knowing theory, but it's by no means necessary. My challenge to you is to apply this. You don't necessarily have to use both, but create a beat and show us what you did. Show us like, oh, look at this. I used color. Trance. If you're a trance person, hey, this is right up your alley. You know, those filter sweeps over like a very long period of time, or just the short ones. They're very often based on repeating patterns that use color variation. Versus if you're like a classical person, or maybe you're a big room person, a fair amount of both happens, but a fair amount of harmonic changes go on to create really cool, compelling melodies with pieces that are supported. Now, of course, we're ignoring rhythm. You could have rhythm back up what you're doing. Today, we're talking about using sounds and chords to do this. So you just pick a cool chord progression and away you go. So that's my challenge. Drop a link down below to your video explaining what you did, or your blog, or your SoundCloud, but just make sure you include an explanation related to the video. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you have a workflow that works for you, maybe you prefer to write the chords first instead of the melody. Maybe you're a little bit different, or depending on the DAW you're in. Like, for example, when I'm working in Renoise, totally different deal than when I'm working in FL, or versus even Ableton, because I'm a lot more prone to use sampling than I am in FL. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.
I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men in our time. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our